Let's talk to Bob Blackman first, who is a Member of Parliament for Harrow East and the Chair of the Backbench Business Committee. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Is it what we expected? I mean, we knew Donald Trump was going to hit the ground running, and this morning, as I said, I didn't know what he'd done until I woke up this morning, and then I saw the 10% for the United Kingdom, 20% for the EU. As a prominent Brexiteer, I did have a wry smile. That being said, of course, I'd rather it was zero for the United Kingdom.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, basically, this is the first instalment of the Brexit dividend that the British people have been promised. I mean, the reality is that what Donald Trump is trying to do is to force companies to manufacture goods and produce services within the United States. These will be tariffs, obviously, that apply to imports to the United States. So it means that when we're selling goods or services to our United States allies, that's increased the cost, which then makes their homegrown products and services seem less expensive. However, of course, there is a risk for the United States that some of those companies within the United States may increase their prices domestically. So it may not actually achieve what he wishes to achieve.
Well, it's interesting. Sorry, I was just going to say, well, of course, the US is the UK's largest export market, buying 58.7 billion of British goods. This is the point I keep trying to make to my friends about the European Union. The United States is so integral to our trading relationships, to the prosperity of this country.
Yes, absolutely. And in the last government, we weren't looking so much as a trade deal with the entirety of the United States, but trying to do trade deals with different states. I mean, you look at Texas, for example, where a deal was being done. That's a bigger economy than most countries in Europe. And so actually doing a direct trade deal with Texas or one of the other states is far more valuable to us than many of the other trade deals that we would negotiate around the world. And, you know, here the crunch, I think, is coming. Donald Trump is clearly taking on China in a big way. China exports to the world using slave labor to manufacture goods and services. So the reality is that, I mean, he's saying that, you know, you're not going to export to the States with goods that are made by slave labor and then dump them on the world. So there are risks for us here. And one of the risks, and I haven't got to the bottom of this yet, because the other thing that he announced yesterday was a global tariff of 25% on vehicles. And whether that 25% is going to apply to British goods, that will be very serious for our car production facilities, because my understanding is we export something like 18% of the cars that we produce in this country to the United States. So that will make them more expensive. On the other hand, the cars that we do provide to the United States tend to be the more luxury models, and so the people that buy them are likely to just say, okay, fair enough, I'll pay the extra money. But that's all got to be assessed. And of course, in this country now, we've got the problem of the national insurance increases. We've got the unemployment bill going through Parliament, which is going to make it more expensive for employers to employ people locally. And then you've got the position of tariffs, and potentially, I mean, this is the risk, that other countries then embarking on a similar type of operation, which then could impact the United Kingdom quite severely. It also means that there's a greater emphasis now on the government to ensure we have those free trade deals around the world, because that will cushion us against what is going on with our friends in the United States.
So I do actually have some figures. 1 in 8 cars built in the United Kingdom is exported to the US. Now, Jaguar Land Rover, of course, as you say, it's a luxury brand. It makes no cars in the United States. 25,000 jobs could be at risk here. And of course, we're talking about Aston Martin, we're talking about McLaren. I take the point that actually, if you're spending all that money anyway, then the imposition of 10% won't actually make a great deal if you've got that much cash in your pocket. But we're also talking about Minis, for example, which is part of that brand as well. This is a huge problem. You've got the pharmaceutical companies like AstraZeneca, like GSK. This is a major market, and those are major companies in this country. And of course, they are the pinnacle of scientific research and development in this country.
Absolutely, and we don't want those companies to cease to operate in the United Kingdom. We had this position, as you know, on Merseyside, where the current government failed to agree the deal with AstraZeneca, and as a result, they basically pulled out of the market. We've got the challenge at the moment in Scunthorpe, where the steelworks there may be closed down. which would then lead us to being in a position of being the only G7 country not manufacturing steel in the world. So I mean that's a disaster for us. So there's a lot of impact here. As we know, that when the United States imposes things like this, it's disruptive to world trade generally. So we're hearing from the government that they're looking at whether they'll retaliate, and they're consulting on that right now. I worry that if we start retaliating, then what will happen is that we'll end up with an escalation, and the tariffs barriers on the UK will increase from the United States.
And to be fair to Keir Starmer, last night he was saying, well, you know, in the House he was saying, well, we need to be cool and calm and collected. We need to think about what we're doing pragmatically. That seems to have changed. Jonathan Reynolds now basically saying they're looking at how government could impose retaliatory tariffs on the United States. He says we're going to have a 4-week opening of a window where the government will ask major companies what they think about the best way to retaliate. That is completely the wrong thing to do, in my humble opinion.
I agree with you, and I think what we should be doing is saying, okay, how could we reduce our non-tariff barriers to the United States and negotiate a reduction in that 10% tariff, rather than looking at retaliatory action that will only lead to that tariff barrier going up again if we do so.
Well, so it's interesting. You mentioned the Brexit dividend there. So we tax US cars at 10%. That's a hangover from the European Union. American levies a 2.5% tariff on vehicles made in Britain. Now, clearly, you could say, well, we need to have parity across the board. That would please Trump.
Indeed. And if we did that, no doubt he would respond accordingly. That's what he's aiming to do, by the way. I mean, if you look at what's happened between his next nearest neighbours, Mexico and Canada, a lot of US firms decided to literally move across the border and manufacture their goods in Mexico or Canada, and then as a result, of course, reducing wages for members of those companies, and actually leading to a position whereby they were getting a cheaper goods that they then exported to the United States, which then exported jobs from the US to those countries. Now, he imposed the tariffs there, and all of a sudden, changes have taken place. What he's doing now is throughout the world imposing those tariffs and saying to the world, well, you've got to manufacture in the United States if you want to supply to us. Now, we can respond to that by saying, no, we'll reduce our tariffs and non-tariff barriers to goods coming into the UK from the United States. The good news about that, of course, is that that would reduce the costs to consumers in the UK, would probably lead to growth in the United Kingdom economy, which is desperately needed, as we know. At the moment, we basically have zero growth in our economy, and as they start to generate worldwide trade, we as a country depend on worldwide trade. It is in our best interests for free trade to exist across the world. We might want to say we don't want certain goods to come into this country. That's a choice that we make. You know, they've always got a chlorinated chicken and such like. We might make that choice, but that's a different issue. What we need to be looking at is how we lower these barriers and get free trade going and growing in the economy, not only in the United Kingdom, but around the world, so that people can become prosperous, not only in our local economies in the UK, but across the world, which benefits everyone.
Bob, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. That's Bob Blackman, MP, Conservative Member of Parliament for Harrow East and Chair of the Backbench Business Committee. Let's talk to Justin Urquhart Stewart now, who is my favourite economist because he actually makes things make sense. Good afternoon, Justin.
Good afternoon. Pleasure to speak to you again.
Well, look, Justin, you and I speak a lot at the weekends, on my show at the weekend, just in terms of these tariffs. What does it mean for us as consumers? Because Rachel Reeves has wiped out her own fiscal headroom. You and I spoke about the fact that she's got such limited fiscal headroom anyway. She only managed it by fiddling the figures. Now we've got the tariffs coming in here. We've got British businesses that are really worried about what is going to happen. I think the government really doesn't have a plan as to what it's doing. The government says, right, we're working on this free trade agreement. We're almost there. I don't believe you. What are your initial thoughts on this?
Well, I think, first of all, to look at the bigger picture of this, I think we have to be really careful when we're dealing with global trade agreements, because history, we learn from history, and we can see what happened in the back in the 20s and 30s, when we saw what happened there, when we saw the global trade effectively grind down, and we went through a depression. And I'm not saying we're going to head for a depression now, but we could find ourselves with a global recession quite easily if people behave stupidly with this. What we've got to be able to do is actually try and make sure that trade keeps on going. Use velocity of money through the economy, more money being spent on a regular basis. If you start slowing that up, you're slowing up the economy, and therefore you will end up slowing up not just growth, but actually the ability to actually create wealth. And that's how you end up finding yourself heading towards a recession. So let's be careful with that one. Secondly, of course, as you quite rightly said, we have got ourselves a benefit of Brexit here by not being allied to what has happened with the EU, who really find themselves in an incredibly difficult position now, because they've got a group of very, very different countries, and some of whom are very dependable on exports, such as France and Germany, and find themselves in difficulty with other countries in that same group who have different economic issues. So it's going to be very difficult for them to actually find a proper leadership and continuity, or continuity, actually making sure consistency of planning to make sure that the whole group moves together. I don't think it can.
Well, so this is the really interesting point for me, which is Ursula von der Leyen has now said they are planning their retaliatory tariffs. And of course, she and the rest of the European Union, I know them well, and I know they'll go in hard. So if they impose 20% tariffs across the board for the United States, and if the United Kingdom actually bides its time, and we do what Bob said, reduce our own tariffs and box cleverly, we could actually come out of this much better than the European Union.
Absolutely right. Well, now is the time not to be big and butch and sit there and start sort of playing D'Artagnan with our FAs and saying we're actually going to be sort of fighting trade wars around the world in gentlemanly style. No, now the time to actually be quite straightforward about it. We need more trade done on a fair basis. Now, some countries have been dumping, as we all well know, what China have been doing, and other areas, and sometimes it gets diverted to other countries, such as Vietnam and Cambodia, because what they're doing is just trying to avoid other barriers. So it's very difficult to actually reach an agreement the entire time which is consistent. What we need to be able to do with our own areas is to be able to say, right, where are the key areas for our export? Now, luckily, okay, of course, actually, our trade with America is roundabout square. You were just talking about the car industry, and of course, it's the top end of the car industry that's being affected. Whereas you take something like Germany, there, of course, they've got the right to the middle end of the car industry, and they really get hit really quite hard for it. Actually, we make most of our money in, of course, services, and particularly financial services, which really hadn't been talked about in this at all. And so that's where we need to try and make sure our focus is, to make sure we can keep on growing and making ourselves as clear, efficient, and independent as possible, so that people want to come and do their business with us here, free of any other form of tax or other anything else which is seen as a delay or a sea anchor to them doing proper, profitable trading here. So now is the time to make ourselves look as free and independent as possible. And again, go back to the 30s, where you saw diametrically the opposite happening, people arguing over trade issues, trade slowed up, and you end up then with a global, not recession, in that case, yes, or a global depression. Now, we don't have to go down that route at all. So now it's time not to be big and butch about it, to be a clear head, to be sensible. And we don't have to do the same as everybody else, because our economy is different. But what we can do, though, is just make sure we can make it clearer, simpler, and easier, so that people in this country understand what's going on. And as we've discussed before, the primary driver of this of our economy is the consumer, you and I. You and I going up, whether it's moving house or actually having supper or whatever it is. Now is the time you need to encourage the consumer, and I'd be doing that by reversing what's happened with stamp duty, encouraging actually getting rid of stamp duty altogether, and say, right, come on, the sun is shining, I want you to go move house or whatever it is. I know times are tight, but for every one person who moves house or the flat or whatever it happens to be, the kitchen, the bathroom, and all the other bits and pieces get changed and money gets spent. It's a great multiplier of expenditure. So at a time when everyone else is worrying about where's the growth coming from, domestically, we can be expanding our economy by actually getting more domestic.
So very quickly, and time is very tight, just in terms of inflation and interest rates, what do we expect the Bank of England to do as a result of what we've seen?
well, depending on how much inflation we're going to be seeing, is this inflation? Potentially, it is inflationary. Do they have to put interest rates up? Certainly not. If I were them, I'd be putting interest rates down. May they delay that interest rate cut? That's quite possible, given what we know from the Bank of England at the moment. I'd be doing the opposite. I'd be saying, right, I'd be looking for cuts now to add to the other incentives to get the consumers, if you can get that vital word back again into the economy, confidence, please.